Here we are. It says to me, meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. So take it away, Dawn.
There we go. Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome to another edition of Humanly Possible, and this is episode 2 of Families. My name is Dawn McCarty, and I am here with my amazing co-host, Alyse-Price-Tobler. Thank you all for being here. So Alyse, will you introduce yourself, and then we will get started.
Okay, my name is Alyse-Price-Tobler. I'm a clinical psychotherapist and also an adult child of severe parental alienation. So Bill's book is of huge interest to me today, and Dawn and I share the same story, so we're both adult children of PA ourselves. So to hear from Bill today will be wonderful, and the fact that he's put it into a book is just a wonderful thing to get out there, and hopefully a lot of people will gain a lot of knowledge from today's interview.
Our guest tonight is Bill McGee, and he is the author of Half the Child, which was a semi-final finalist in both the James Jones First Novel Competition and the William Faulkner Creative Writing Competition. I hope I got those right.
Yep.
He is an investigative journalist, a columnist, and also a consumer advocate for all airline passengers. He has taught creative writing classes for about 10 years, and he's also the author of Attention All Passengers, which is a nonfiction expose on the airline industry. So Bill, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Dawn and Alyse. I really appreciate it. We're all in different places and different parts of the world, but it's great to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's great seeing you. I think the last time I saw you, we were blowing bubbles on Zoom on Parental Alienation Awareness Day, where there were about 30 of us.
Bubbles of love, yes.
Bubbles of love. I've got my bubbles collection in the background here. I can whip it out at any minute. So that's what we use across the world to recognize children and adults who are being exposed to parental alienation. It's the bubbles that we use. That's our thing. Yes. So yeah, it was.
That was quite an that was a fun day. We had a lot of stuff going on, and in fact, that is the day that we all met, and we were all sitting there blowing bubbles on the screen. That was kind of fun. I've never, we see that with other people singing their songs and stuff, but here we are blowing bubbles.
Yeah, it wasn't during the day for me. It was 4 a.m.
That's right. It was the middle of the night for you.
Yeah.
Well, we were glad you were there, Bill, because that that gave us that introduction and why we wanted to bring you on our show to talk about some of the successes that you've had in being an advocate and the book that you've written, Half the Child. So do you want to give us a little background with the book?
Sure, absolutely. This is Half the Child. It's a novel. And it's for anybody who's interested in reading it. It's currently in print and Kindle, and I'm very excited to say it's currently being formatted as an audiobook, and that should be out soon.
Nice.
There were some glitches due to COVID, but I'm excited about that. It's a terrific guy who's doing the reading, and like me, and like Michael, the fictional narrator of Half the Child, we all have New York accents. This novel is set almost entirely in the New York City borough of Queens, where I'm from originally. And so we've got a good New York accent working on that audio book, which hopefully will be available soon. So Half the Child is, as I said, it's fiction. It's a novel told in first person by a young man named Michael Mullen, who's, when it starts out, he's 34 years old. And the book is broken up into 4 consecutive summers when his son is 2, 3, 4, and 5. And each of the summers sort of reflects a different stage of his son Ben's development. When he's 2, he's obsessed with colors, and 3, numbers and counting, and 4, words and language, and then 5, concepts and ideas. And of course, the more that Ben learns, the more that his father Michael learns too, right? As good parents always do. And so it chronicles a very heartbreaking struggle as Michael and Ben's mother undergo a separation, and then a divorce, and then a custody battle, and it culminates in an abduction, an international abduction, at which point Michael doesn't even know where Ben is. And so, you mentioned, Dawn, that I teach creative writing for about 10 years on the college level and the graduate level. I taught courses in both fiction and nonfiction, creative nonfiction. And I write both fiction and creative nonfiction. I have, one fiction book out and one nonfiction book out. And writers make choices, and I made some very deliberate choices in Half the Child. I won't be holding it up constantly, but I'll hold it up once in a while.
No, go ahead. Hold it up anytime you want.
Yeah, your time.
And one of the choices I made, as I said, is that it's written in first person I, from Michael's perspective, because I wanted to get inside one head and to sort of chronicle what he's going through. And I also made the decision to write it in present tense, which is, I won't say it's rare, but it's less common than past tense in novels. Usually novels are in past tense. And so the question is not just when did the events happen, but sometimes the more important question is, well, where's the perspective of when these events happened, right? So in other words, is it 5 years later? Is it 10 years later? Is it 50 years later? I didn't want that. I didn't want him to have any perspective. I wrote it in present tense so that we, the readers, are understanding these events just as he is. In other words, Michael goes through this entire novel constantly reacting, very rarely acting, mostly reacting, responding, and constantly being shocked. And he continually says things like, well, I'm hoping things are going to get better. And oh boy, they don't. They just keep getting worse and worse. And he just never can really, I chronicle it, I say it's sort of like a car accident. It's happening slowly and in real time. And he's just constantly being buffeted. Every time he thinks, well, maybe we're turning a corner and things will be a little better for him and his son, unfortunately they get worse. And I wanted to do that on purpose. I wanted to create, if I had written it from his perspective 10 years later, well, he'd be a lot wiser and a lot more knowledgeable about all these issues. And I wanted to explain that many people, adults, let alone children, when they're undergoing parental alienation, when they're undergoing a custody struggle, separation, abduction, they just don't know. They don't know what the rules are. They have no knowledge of it. They have no skills that prepared them for it. And it's just, it comes out of the blue. It's not like a soldier is trained to go into combat. This is like no one's trained for this unless you.
Who do you talk to, or
Yeah, exactly.
Do you
And
need
in
to
fact,
contact
that's one of the reasons I wrote the book.
do?
I'm hoping that others can relate to it and learn from it and say, oh yeah, that's my story. That's my brother's story, my sister's story, whoever,
Yes, very important. It will help a lot of parents who find themselves in a maze of court systems and parental alienation and grief from being away from their child, and shock and the way that you speak about the character in your book being reactive is often how people are. They don't expect what it's turned into, the marriage and the divorce and everything. So it is a very reactionary process. So the fact that you've written it from that point of view is really amazing. So it'll give a lot of insight into this very insidious paradigm. So thank you, Bill. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It reminds me when you say that, Alyse, I'll share a reader review because it was negative. A reader reached out to me and she sent me an email to my website, halfthechild.com, and she said, she had some problems with the book, and I'm always eager to talk, good, bad, or whatever. And so I said, well, please tell me. And she said, well, when Michael did X and when Michael did Y and when Michael did Z, those were the wrong things that he was doing. And I said, yes, I'm aware of that, and I said, that's intentional. And I said, can I ask you what your profession is? And she said, well, I'm an attorney. And I said, well, bingo. That is the idea. If Michael were a divorce attorney, then there would be no novel, right? But the fact is, we haven't talked about it, his job. He has a nice, quiet job, very stress-free. He's an air traffic controller at New York's LaGuardia Airport, right? So obviously he has, I'm kidding, it's a high-stress job. Yes. But, he knows nothing about this world of legalities and courts and judges and forensic psychologists and all the rest of it, and child custody and abduction. And I think a great many other people go through the same thing. Again, that's why it's in present tense. So I gently explained to this reader, I thanked her for contacting me and all that, and I said, well, I had no desire to write a novel, from the perspective of a lawyer. I wanted to write it for whether he's an air traffic controller or an accountant or a dentist or whatever, someone who had no knowledge of these things and is buffeted by it. Why? Because hundreds of thousands of people go through this every year. They're not prepared for it. Again, no one gives you a course in this, And I can tell you, I had an agent that was out, shopping this book, and from a very big agency, one of the two biggest agencies in the United States or in the world. And he did some research when he was sending the book out. And it turns out that he said in the United States, there has not been a novel published in the United States about custody or child custody issues from the perspective of a father rather than a mother. There's not been a novel written in the United States or published since 1973, almost 50 years ago. That novel was Kramer versus Kramer, which famously became a movie a few years after that with Meryl Streep.
Horrible movie. Yeah. Oh, I remember seeing that. That was very moving. Oh my gosh, we didn't expect anything like that on the TV.
No. And so, that was 47 years ago. And I said, well, you're saying that in almost 50 years, no American book publisher has published a book about child custody from the perspective of a father. Nonfiction books, yes. Books from perspectives of mothers, yes. So that, to be honest, that's one of the reasons I had trouble trying to get this published, because there's a perception that women do most of the book buying and most of the reading, and women don't want to read about male protagonists. And yet, if you go on Amazon and look at the reviews of Half the Child, the glowing reviews mostly come from women. So a lot of women are sending in marriage proposals to a fictional character. They want to marry Michael. They want to go out with him. They want to date him. And I have to break the news to them that he's fictional, sorry. But they love the idea that he's such a loving and caring and devoted dad. And that's obviously very attractive to them,
Yes,
So, I disagree with the publishing industry's assertion that women don't want to read about something from a man's perspective. They clearly want to read this, and they want to read about good dads.
Well, you've kind of set the example that they will. So if there are people out there that do want to write a book about it, like they can refer to the fact that this book does have successful reviews like that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you. But and so I should say that we've been throwing around the term parental alienation, and I guess maybe we should just stop for a moment and try and give a rough definition of that. Both of you are much better equipped than I. But I spoke last year at an international organization called Parental Alienation Support Group, PASG, and they had their annual conference in Philadelphia last fall, and I was honored to speak on the last day, almost the last event, with Ginger Gentile, who has made a documentary movie about parental alienation. And so a filmmaker and a novelist, two artists who are addressing this from a different perspective than all the lawyers and the mental health professionals that are in the room. And I opened with a confession, which I'm happy to repeat tonight, which is I spent on and off, be very clear. I didn't spend 20 years writing this book, but I started it 20 years ago. And then I put it aside. I did other things, like I kept going back and forth to it. But over the course of those 20 years, until the final year when I was finishing it up about 2 years ago, I'm not ashamed to say I'd never heard the term parental alienation. I was writing a novel about parental alienation, and I didn't know there was a name for it. Now
that's not surprising, Bill. It's not surprising at all.
Yeah.
It's not surprising at all. I'm a mental health professional as well as the adult child, and most of the people I speak to, including mental health professionals, have not heard of it. So pretty shocking. Even the psychiatrist that I was having a meeting with 2 days ago had never heard of the term. So it doesn't surprise me at all.
No, right. As an adult child myself, I'd never heard of the word until only a few years ago. So I'm only about 2 years into knowing or hearing of parental alienation. And there's things that we know that happen, with Alyse and I and other children that we talk to, other adult children. They know certain things happen, but we really didn't understand what the word was. What do you label this? What is it called?
Right. Does it have a name? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of Michael's journey, because he doesn't know it has a name. He doesn't know anyone that's undergone similar experiences, and for him, it creates a feeling of isolation. So I was honored to do a reading about 2 weeks ago. A friend of mine organized in New Jersey, in Jersey City, a reading series with poets, and I was the only novelist reading. And we spoke about isolation, because what better time? Here we are on Zoom, right? This is 2020 is the year of isolation as far as I'm concerned. I live alone, so I am as isolated as can be since March. And I'm very lucky. I have family and friends and my son and the rest of it. And I talk to people on Zoom and phone and everything else. But effectively, I'm isolated in terms of physical contact and hugging people and all of that stuff. And it occurred to me that half the child, in many ways, is about isolation as well.
Yeah.
And
oops, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. Yeah. Go on.
I was just going to say, what I think is really important to point out is we're talking about right now, everybody's on the stay at home, and we're sort of isolating ourselves from other humans. And a lot of people are struggling with that, and they don't know exactly, what to do, what to make of it. And it's very difficult. But what I want to attach to that, what I want to tie together here, is that when a child is removed from one of their parents, that isolation is the exact same thing. And they don't know how to handle that or address that or deal with it or process that. So isolating a child from a loved one is what everybody is kind of going through right now. Maybe not as severely, because, sometimes for the child it's permanent. Hopefully this is only going to be a couple of months and we can move on and get back to living our lives. But it can be a permanent thing for children. And everybody right now should stop and think for just a second about how you feel about being isolated, and then what we're doing to children, making them feel very isolated.
Right. No question. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I, I'm just thinking there might be people out there going, what is parental alienation? They haven't actually explained it.
Right.
So I'll do a very brief version, no one's version in particular, but this always sits well with me personally, being an adult child of PA, so I like this one. So it's basically limiting contact and keeping a child from their other parent after a separation or divorce, talking badly about the other parent to the child, not informing the other parent about important information, basically brainwashing a child to be with one parent and not the other, erasing the other parent from a child's life, manipulating a child's feelings to interfere with the other parent's relationships. And I just want to stop for a second, because this is so normal out in society that you'll probably be seeing people practice this, for those who are watching, and think nothing of it. But please know that it is a form of child psychological abuse, and it actually does have the name parental alienation, and it's not okay to be aligning with somebody who's doing this. Kids need both parents. They also need both sets of grandparents, all their cousins. They need uncles, aunties. They need everybody on the other side of the family. So when we're talking about parental alienation, often that entire side of the family is cut off or denigrated. So be very alert to these types of behaviours. They're not okay at all for the children. So basically they make a child choose side of which parent to love. They force a child to reject or hate the other parent. They make a child fearful of the other parent. And like I said, parental alienation has emotional, mental and psychological effects that are lifelong, and Dawn and I are happy to talk about that at any point, what that actually really looks like from an adult's point of view. So that's parental alienation in a nutshell. Don't do it.
Exactly.
Take it away, Bill.
Yes. No, thank you. I knew you would do a much better job than me. Also, I mean, part of my journey here and learning about it is I not only learned about the concept, but I also learned how controversial it is among attorneys. There are attorneys that argue whether or not it exists, and even among some mental health professionals. So I know it's a controversial issue.
Yes, well, they can come and have a very black and white conversation with Dawn and I at any time, because I can explain it from a mental health perspective and an adult child's perspective, and I can tell you it is 100% real.
You trust me. I believe you. I'm well aware.
It's the attorneys and other people out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And so, yeah, I mean, that sense of isolation, again, it's brought home during this time with COVID and with everyone sheltering and all the rest of it. I posted something on social media recently on Facebook and elsewhere. I've been seeing a lot about, the concept that for children or adults, partners, whoever, even senior parents, if you're in an environment in which you're being abused physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever, this time is hell right now, right? I mean, there are
Yes.
kids that want to be in school because they're getting beat when they're at home, right?
Yes.
And so there's some awareness of that, and obviously I applaud that, and that's great. But it got me thinking, well, what about the parental alienation situations and the two home families right now? It's obviously very difficult because a lot of, first of all, a lot of courts are just shut down, and judges have gone home and say you can't sort of race and get a legal solution in some cases. So if you had a custody agreement and a visitation agreement that, you were supposed to see the child once a week or once every other week or whatever it was, well, what's been happening since March? And obviously I've been looking online, I've been seeing all these heartbreaking stories of kids and parents who haven't seen each other or even spoken to each other, because that's, again, that part of alienation that you were talking about, Alyse, where it's like, well, okay, even if we say there won't be in-person visits due to the concerns of COVID, well, here we are on Zoom, right? Why not do Zoom? Well, we can't do Zoom. We don't have that, all the excuses that are made. So it's just something to keep in mind for people that, the pain for the parent is tremendous, but the pain for the child, it may not be as a parent, and it lasts for a long time too. So we have to be aware of that.
That's important to point out. So, we cannot use this as an excuse, because no matter what, stay-at-home orders mean stay at home, but the child has two homes. So that it needs to be very clear. And also, going back to what we were talking about with the attorneys work on a day-to-day basis. They live there one day at a time, right? They're just trying to get through the next case, the next hearing. They're just, trying to make a living. The child is just trying to get to the adult stage. They're trying to grow up. They're trying to become an adult, and they're trying to have families of their own. Totally different scenarios, and they're not aligned. So when the attorneys are focused on the day-to-day, drive to earn a living, that is not the same or equivalent for what a child needs from them. So the focus needs to change back to the child, not the attorney. And I know that's not what we have. We don't have that system at all.
No.
Yeah. And with regards to the COVID, I know that New Zealand, I've spoken to a solicitor over there, they said that the child is allowed to go between parents in the COVID, especially families that I deal with who have 50-50 custody. They cannot stop that, and so nobody can stop that. The child can go, and it's the same here in Australia. So I don't know what it's like over there in America, but it was very, very clear when COVID started that the 50-50 or the moving from home to home between parents was not allowed to be interrupted at all. So
we are having some major problems with it. And I believe that there's, I think there's a doctor who, because she works as a frontline person, has actually lost visitation to her child altogether. And I think there's some fathers out there in the same situation. And I think it depends like where you're at, but we have
that's different.
We have
that might be little.
And I believe maybe someone can mention in the comments, I think we had a Supreme Court decision saying you can't use COVID as an excuse not to continue with your custody arrangements. So whatever it is, it still needs to be followed through. However, enforcing that is still just as hard as enforcing any other court order.
Yeah, for the first responders, it must be absolutely awful to have been placed on them to not be able to see their children during this time, because their job is already dangerous and hard enough as it is.
Yes.
To be isolated even more, and it's such a terrible time at the moment. So my heart goes out to the first responders, especially the American ones. And Canadian, we've been watching what's happening over there with your first responders from over here, and we're heartbroken about what they're going through. So to add, sorry, PA on top of that, not good.
Yes, in fact, I have a friend who is a frontline healthcare professional, and she's been working around the clock, and she's got all of the stress and anxiety that brings, and now she's been told she can't see her child until,
Right.
until the duration.
I know it's
Heartbreaking.
happening everywhere to both, mothers and fathers. It's really, it's a shame. It's really a shame because, you're cheating your child. That's what you're doing. You're not cheating a system. You're cheating a human being, a child that loves that other.
And they remember, that's our message, isn't it, Dawn? The children grow up and
Absolutely.
the children remember these incidents. So don't think that you'll just get away with doing this behaviour, because we do remember it, and we possibly will have a conversation with you.
Yeah. So I am actually very interested in the name of your book, Half the Child. Because I'll throw a little bit in there about, a lot of people know my story, but I actually felt like half a person when I was growing up. And Alyse, maybe you can attest to how that made you feel. But Half the Child is really a good name when you're talking about that.
Well, thank you. So this is the cover. I hope it can be seen. I don't know, Alyse, if you have this down under, but here in the U.S., on the backs of cars, very often people put little stick figures of their family.
Oh, yes, we do. We do. It was a huge craze a couple of years ago.
Right. The bigger the car, the bigger the stick figures, right?
Yeah, dogs and horses.
Hold it up to the camera a little closer so they can understand the stick figure. So if you
right,
sticker,
that makes a lot of sense now.
The child is cut in half.
Right.
Wow, that's very poignant.
So
well done picking that.
It is. I am not an artist in any way, shape, or form. I had a great artist named Eric Hofstein do the cover, Eric Hofstein. But it is my idea. So I did the rough sketch. And it happened because I live in Connecticut, and I'm on the interstate in traffic a lot. And I was in a traffic jam one day, not moving for about 15 minutes. And I was staring at a minivan in front of me. And there was a daddy and a mommy and a son and a daughter and a cat and a dog and a bird and everything else. And I was just staring at it for 15 minutes. And I thought, well, what happens if this happy family is not one? I guess there'll be two vans, and you'll have to cut those kids in half. I don't know about the dog and the cat, but
Yeah.
And so that was the idea. And it references in the novel. There's a reference to the biblical story of King Solomon, who famously. And it's funny. I knew the story growing up, but I wasn't familiar with it. And I went back and read it, and then I read a long essay about it. And I have to tell you, by the time I was done with that essay, there were tears streaming down my face. It's, we probably have all heard it at one point that King Solomon, the wisest of judges, basically had a custody battle. He had two women that both claimed a baby as their own. One of them had rolled over in the night and smothered her baby, so she claimed the other woman's baby. And he brought them before, and each one said it was theirs. And then he said, well, there's only one way to solve this. And he turned to a soldier and said, give me your sword. I'll cut the child in half, and you'll each have half. And the woman who was, in fact, the mother immediately said, no, let her have him. And the one who was lying said, fine, cut him in half. So Solomon, being as wise as he was, knew who the real parent was, and gave the baby to her. So that's the concept, but I have to tell you, I love the title, but it came to me fairly late in the writing process. Most of the time when I was writing it had a different title. It was called The Fruit of the Marriage. That was the working title. And then when Half the Child hit me, I knew that Half the Child was right. But Fruit of the Marriage is referenced in the novel because it's a legal term. I don't know if it's used worldwide, but I know it's used in New York State where this novel takes place. And it's a term that lawyers use. Yeah. And it can mean a house or a car or a boat or a child, So it gives you a sense of how we monetize everything, including little children, The fruit of the marriage might be a house or it might be a baby.
No, I totally disagree with the child being the fruit of the marriage. Now, I understand that it is the fruit of the couple, but it doesn't take a marriage to have a child. So how could it possibly be the fruit of the marriage? So we have a lot of unmarried, parents out there, You know, my
Yes.
father was not married to my mother. So, you know, how does that apply with them? They don't even have
Yeah.
that court process. So, you know, they're actually being, you know, left out of parenthood legally on a legal,
Right.
you know, aspect of that. So
Right.
I totally disagree with the court systems and attorneys saying this is, you know, fruit of the marriage. No, it's not.
Yes. No,
I love the
absolutely.
title. I love the title. I love the pictures. I love the graphics. I love it.
No,
It's
yeah.
very, very clever, actually.
I appreciate it. So, you know, we're talking about isolation, and if you'd like, I could just read a very quick section, maybe
Absolutely.
one or
Would
two
love it.
paragraphs,
Yes.
just to give you a sense. As I say, it's written in first person from Michael's perspective. So he's an air traffic controller at one of the busiest airports in the world, LaGuardia Airport in New York, which is not one of the largest, but one of the busiest. It's small and cramped. And I used to work in aviation myself, so I'm familiar with that world. And he finds that he's sort of an air traffic controller's air traffic controller. He prides himself on being professional and being one that other controllers respect. His work ethic is impeccable. And he was an air traffic controller in the military and now in the civilian world. And he's finding that for the first time in his life, his ability to leave everything at the door of the tower and to just focus on work, he's losing that ability. This child custody situation is bleeding over into his work. I won't give away any good plot points, but there is a very dramatic scene later in the novel where he's overwhelmed by what's happening with his son, and he makes a critical error at work, and that's all I'll say. I won't say how that plays out. So there are a lot of scenes that take place up in the tower where he starts thinking about Ben, his son, when he should be talking to a Boeing 767. So here's just a very quick scene with like 2 paragraphs. It's busy in the tower, but finally I'm relieved for a meal break. I don't eat, and instead I go downstairs. The elevator runs just to the 14th floor, and from there the tower is accessible only by a narrow staircase. I head to the men's room and enter the last stall. Without unbuckling, I sit fully clothed and lean my head on the cold tile wall. Life without Ben. Yes, we've been hammering out the visitation agreement for Evansville, but it's just that, visits. For the next year, I won't be living with Ben, and he won't be living with me. Laying out the next day's outfit and discussing the colored stripes in his shirt. Watching his tiny fingers scoop the dough from the inside of a bagel, leaving the crusty covering as though it were an orange peel. Carrying him home after he falls asleep in Lovey, that's their beloved station wagon. Somehow, Ben and I both have to make it through this year, and then we can exhale. I sit until my head aches from the cold. Finally, I return and again speak to airplanes. I just wanted to read that short section. The sections in the novel, there aren't chapters per se. They range from 1 sentence to 14 pages. So sometimes it's just a thought. And other times it's a lengthy scene. But again, this theme of isolation, it just plays out. And at one point, Michael says to us, the readers, he says, I've never felt more alone. I feel as though I'm a demographic of one. And I later wrote an essay about the book called The Demographic of One. I think in many ways we're all demographic of one. We live in an age where there's a lot of consciousness about identity, whether it's race or nationality, religion, sexual orientation, so many different ways we identify. Right. And there's greater respect than ever, which is great for all of those differences and whatnot. But ultimately, I think all of us are a demographic of one. No one quite has our set of experiences and life experiences and feelings and relationships. And I want to be very clear. Michael is very, very lucky. You were talking, I think, Dawn, about family. And, oh, no, I'm sorry, it was you, Alyse, where you talked about aunts, because you said aunties, aunties and uncles and siblings and all the rest. That's a big part of this novel. Michael is very, very lucky in one sense, in that he has, a loving circle of family and friends who support him. But he also
on both sides,
no,
Bill?
just on his side. So when Ben doesn't see Michael, Ben also doesn't see his grandparents and his aunts and his uncles and his cousins and friends of the family, etc.
The extended family was cut off as well.
Right. Right. And that's another thing that I don't think a lot of people understand about these issues of parental alienation and custody is that they affect a wide circle of people. It's not, in this case, there's three people at the center of it, a mother, a father, and a child, but it affects,
Yes.
more than a dozen people,
And all the milestones that go along with everybody's lives, all the birthdays,
Absolutely.
21st,
Holidays,
deaths, funerals,
sure.
holidays. Huge.
Yeah.
Yes. Just point
Yeah.
that out. Sorry.
That's important too, though, Alyse, because death is hard, but it is something that a child does experience when they have older grandparents. So sometimes we have 4 generations alive at one time, and
Right.
they need to know
5.
that grandparent. Sometimes there's 5, exactly. So them missing out on the right to know that grandparent and actually be part of a living 5 generations is pretty cool, and the child has a right to know all of their family, that especially all of their living family, their living relatives.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, because that's history for them as well. Who am I? Where did I come from? What were the experiences of the people who came before me that made me who I am now?
And they need to experience those.
Forgotten. Yes, and it's very important also from a physical point of view, especially with things like diabetes in the family or heart disease, things like that coming through. The child needs to be aware of what could be coming in from that side as well. So to cut that off puts them at a health risk later on, or even as children as well. So that's another thing.
Absolutely.
Well, Alyse, how about the child actually experiencing their grandparents dying, that passing on, and knowing them while they're living, and then having to go through that grieving process? That's also an important element too, is it?
Yes, because that happened to me. So when I was estranged from my father, and when we were reunited during that time, my paternal grandparents both passed away. So I'd known them as a young person, and then by the time I was reunited, they were gone. And Dad even said to me yesterday, it was heartbreaking for my grandmother and grandfather not to be able to see us ever again, pretty much. So yeah, don't want to make this about my story, but it's really important that the grandparents are included no matter what's happening with divorce and separation and all of the other family members. It's not okay to stop us seeing them, or when we do go and see them, to make it difficult for us when we get home. The fact that we've had a connection and we have other people who love us, don't take that off us. It's not okay to do that.
Right. Well, and I think, all of this speaks to what we've been talking about, which is isolation, and that's why when Michael announces, to the reader, I feel like a demographic of 1. I think that's something that resonates across all of the many things that divide us. In a way, I think we all feel like a demographic of 1 at times. And he's in this experience. Again, he has no blueprint. He didn't take a class in how to deal with this. His life is just going to hell in every way. His physical health, his emotional health, he winds up becoming critically depressed and needs to get assistance and get medication and therapy. His finances, he rings up about $250,000 in US dollars in legal fees. Wow. His performance at work starts being affected. His other love besides his son, of course, and being an air traffic controller, he's studying psychology on the side and going to graduate school. He has to stop that. He loses a few friends along the way. Some relationships strengthen because of the experience, and some fall away. He has a friend who says to him one day, well, what are you so upset about? You'll see your son at Christmas, And he just says to himself, I have no desire to ever be friends with this person ever again, because we are so worlds apart. I could talk for hours and he'll never get it. So take care. Bye. And I think there are people that can relate to that experience, and whether we're talking about this or something else, whether it's, a returning wounded veteran, whether it's someone who's dealing with a fatal illness or the victim of a crime. We're all a demographic of 1 at times. And that's why, I have to tell you, I'm going to be very honest with both of you, and I'm sure you can appreciate it. I'm sure you've experienced it too. when I go on some of the social media pages and the web pages and the blogs and whatnot about these issues, I see it very often devolve into a gender war, and it
Yes,
upsets me tremendously.
me too.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very quickly, you know, some people sort of show their colors, and it's clear that there are a lot of misogynists that hate women, and it's clear that there are maybe an equal number of women who hate men. Misandry, a word that doesn't get used as often as misogyny, but that's the counterpart, right? And so, you know, when we speak about isolation, on paper, Michael has tremendous advantages, and I'm very sensitive to privilege. You know, it's a term that's used a lot these days. He's white, he's a male, he's heterosexual. In a place like the United States, that's, you know, top of the heap. And yet his life goes to hell, and none of those things matter. And in fact, if anything, his gender may work against him with the particular judge who is, you know, who's at the head of this custody dispute. And so those things fall away. We're all people. And when you start, you know, taking identity politics to the point of that all X in this group are always right and all people in this group are always wrong, you know, that's when I sign off. It's just, you know,
Yeah.
I'm as sensitive to mothers who undergo this, and I've had mothers close to me in my life who have undergone terrible, terrible custody situations.
Yeah.
And to me, my litmus test is going to sound really, really simple, and it may make me sound dumb, but I don't care. My litmus test is very simple. Who's the one that cares more about the child? That's the one who you should listen to.
Well, and Alyse and I can tell everybody listening, and there may be people out here that are not part of this particular world, the parental alienation world. We can tell you that we don't care if it's a mother or a father, that it's a parent first. And that's what we care about, because we love both of our parents. And sometimes they're not, you know, mother or father. Sometimes they're two mothers. Sometimes there's two mothers.
Right.
So the child's relationship is what matters, not what they are, not, you know, what gender they are. We really don't care at all. And we don't like hearing this battle either. You know, the battle needs to stop with, you know, it's worse for me, it's worse for you. It's worse for the child, ultimately.
Absolutely.
And that's the truth. That's the bottom line. The more you continue that gender war, the more you're damaging children. And
and you're taking the light. You're
Mhm.
taking the light off the child too, and you're making it about yourself.
Right.
And that needs to not happen. It needs to be about the child. So the more energy that is spent in the courts fighting, the more gender war stuff is spoken about, the less the child is being seen and heard. And this Humanly Possible is about the voice of the child. So that's what we try and get across on our show all the time as well. Not a gender war. It happens to both men and women.
I knew instinctively that both of you felt that way, but I'm sure you've encountered many who don't. And you know, I've gotten responses to the novel in emails that are sent through the website and whatnot, and some of them are very disturbing. And on both sides, there, you know, again, there are people that just hate the opposite gender, and you know, and so that experience that they had, whatever it is, has colored how they view the world. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there's, Alyse, you might be particularly interested in it, there's a character in here named Paco, who is a very unconventional therapist, and he's Michael's psychotherapist. He's a frustrated Broadway dancer, so he, at times during their sessions, will get up and dance on the coffee table if he's happy to. And
I love it.
So he, at one point, says to Michael, and he's undergoing this dramatic thing where his son is abducted and he's in court and all of these problems with work and finances and everything. And he comes in and he says, we're not going to talk about any of that today. That'll all take care of itself. I want to talk about you. And I want to talk about post-custody, post-abduction, what kind of person you're going to be. I think he's a brilliant psychotherapist to do that, you know, because the nitty gritty, the day-to-day, you could talk about that all day. But he said, you have lawyers for that. You don't need me for that. He said, you know, are you going to be that guy? And forgive the language, but he says, are you going to be that guy that sits on a bar stool and says, let me tell you about this bitch,
Yeah.
He said, there's a guy like that in every bar in America,
Yeah.
and there are an equal number of women that say the same thing and they hate men. He said, in other words, you're at a crossroads. I mean, the legalities, all of those things, that'll take care of itself. You're fighting the fight for your child, et cetera, and all that is good. But where are you going to be on the other side of this? You're a young guy. You're in your 30s. You have a lot of life to live. Are you going to love again? Are you going to give the human race a chance again? Are you going to, find romance again? I won't answer some of those questions for Michael's case because I don't want to give anything away. But those are critical questions that people have to ask themselves in a situation like this.
So you're going to have to get the book if you want to know the answers.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you, Dawn. Did I mention both print and Kindle, soon to be in audiobook? Thank you, Dawn. Dawn said it. I did.
I love that it's coming in audio too. That's awesome.
Yeah. I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm not getting the hard copy. It's going in my shelf.
Thank you. I had dinner a couple of months back before all the craziness with COVID with the actor who's doing the reading. And he had a long list of, terms to be clear and the cadences of how to speak as an air traffic controller. The whole thing with air traffic control is unlike me, as few words as possible. I go the other direction, as my son will be happy to tell you, and use as many words as possible. But air traffic control is you get on, you get off. You don't blah, blah, blah. You're not.
Well, don't they kind of speak low and under their breath too?
Absolutely. And you don't show emotion and, right. And so, yes, sir. So if there's a dramatic situation in which a plane, for example, has to do what they call a go around and can't land and has to take, copy that, sir. Clear to blah, blah, blah. And you just very quietly and you just move along. And I've been in air traffic control towers where potentially dramatic events have happened and I wasn't aware of it because I was looking this way because nobody gets, oh my God, look what's happening. It's not like that, And so anyway, the audiobook will be fun. But yeah, so Michael, this journey of isolation, as it were, he at one point, even the term custody battle, I have trouble with it. I know I use it myself at times and I sort of catch myself. I have trouble with it because it implies that two parents are in a battle. And to me, it's really not about that because then it implies, what does every battle have? A winner and a loser, right? And so I don't look at it in those terms as a mother or a father or two fathers or two mothers. Somebody wins and somebody loses. So at one point, a friend of his at work says, how's the custody battle going? Who's winning? And he says, well, I hope my son is, and he means it. He's not just giving off a line, in New York State where this takes place, where half the child takes place, the rule supposedly in theory in the court system is whatever is in quote, the best interest of the child. There are other states and other countries that say the same thing and same words or different words, but same concept.
The real best interest of the child.
Right. And yet the reality is, that's just not the way it is in far too many cases in the court system. And they don't look at the best interest of the child. And so,
but what a perfect answer that you gave. I hope, that Michael said, or Ben said, is it Ben?
Yeah.
No, it's Michael.
Michael, yeah.
Michael said, I hope my son is. That's a perfect response.
It is because then the focus, like you said earlier, Alyse, the focus shouldn't be on the parents. The focus should be on the child. If we're talking about what's best for the child, then the rest falls into place. So that means you have to make sacrifices, whether it's in your career or your love life or your finances or where you live or whatever. Do it for the best interest of the child. When the child gets older, you can go back to doing what it was you wanted to do. But sacrifices often have to be made.
That's right. Totally. And you bring the children into the world and you think about it like when you get pregnant, it's the best thing in the whole world. And then you have the child and everyone's ecstatic. And then what goes wrong? Get yourselves into couples counseling. Look at your stuff. If you've brought baggage into the marriage, have a look at what it is. Talk about it. Figure it out. Try and do some change. Get yourselves together. Learn some other communication. Like, check out a few of the nonviolent communication methods, like with Marshall Rosenberg. Learn how to speak to each other. Just try and work through things before you run to divorce for the option. Like, do this as much as you can for the child. And then if you can't manage to do that, try to separate and just keep the child 100%. What's best for the child? What's best for the child? Not what's best for me,
Mm-hmm.
against you. What's best for the child?
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind.
Well,
Do
nothing
better, people.
Well said. Well said.
Nothing happens automatically. I mean, you
No,
just
it's
because you
hard
have a
work.
child doesn't mean you're going to have a great marriage. So you have to continue to work on yourself and your marriage, and learning how to constantly get along, because it's not a one and done thing. You know, you got to keep working at it.
Absolutely, for a long time. And we've got a lot of intergenerational trauma coming into our marriages, and we might have stuff from our previous partners coming into our marriages. Go and see a family systems therapist and get some help.
Right. Well said.
Maybe we should be going to a family system therapist before we start into relationships or getting married.
Well, yeah,
I don't know how we do that.
Here you go. 50, this is some of my work here. 52 questions before you get married or move in together. This is the work that I do with people who, when they come in to see me, we just run through all the different things to make sure that everybody is compatible, and you don't have to be all in agreement with everything, but understand the other person and where they're coming from and what they want and where they want to be. But a lot of the time, people who come in to see me, they're just like, they've gotten married all of a sudden, and like now they've got children and all hell's breaking loose, and now they're separating, and I'm like, okay, let's get on the same page.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting these days. The divorce
just
rates.
Reminded me of my very close friend Andy, who's a fantastic writer. He helped work on a book about 2 years ago for a very high-profile divorce attorney. And this guy goes on TV, and he's very well known in the New York area. And he goes on national TV and speaks about divorce. And the name of the book that he wrote is, this divorce attorney, is If You're in My Office, It's Already Too Late. You know?
Right.
And,
okay. Well, if you're in my office, it's not.
There you go. Good.
I try and get.
Title.
We keep more couples together than we do separate, and if they are separating, then we help them to separate. If it's done and dusted and everything's worked through, and there's definitely separation time, then we work with them to separate and still stay in a good space so that the child is number one.
That's
great. So that's also part of our jobs as therapists too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you like, I could just read you another quick section. It's only a couple
paragraphs.
Love it.
Sure.
And it speaks to some of the stuff we've been talking about with gender, and what it speaks to also is Michael. This takes place just a few years ago in 2016, 2017, and Michael's about 34 years old. He was born in 1978, and his father, who was about 30 years older than him, is a New York City firefighter. And in some ways, very heroic figure. He's one of the most highly decorated firefighters of all time. And particularly after 9/11, the respect for New York firefighters is off the charts.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's a complexity because, quite frankly, he's a lousy father and a lousy husband. And so that Michael, as his son, struggles with that. On the one hand, he reveres his father's heroism and the sacrifices he makes for strangers, where he's literally risked his life to save the lives of other children, and yet wasn't there for his own children in very fundamental ways, and was a pretty bad parent. So Michael struggles with some fundamental issues, one of which is, what is a father these days? And certainly I think it's true worldwide, but I know it's true in the United States. The roles of fathers have changed dramatically in recent decades. And so whether it's dealing with courts or with anyone, and they're using stereotypes from the 1950s or 60s of fathers that don't know their kids, features, or their teddy bear, or has never changed a diaper, or doesn't know how to, that is so unrealistic for so many fathers now. This guy, Michael, the most important thing in his life, more important than his job or anything else, is his son. He's devoted to his son. And so in this brief little scene, he has an encounter with a stranger in a park. He's playing with his son in a park, but he's about 3 in this section. So of course he conks out and needs a nap. And what happens when a kid needs a nap? You start crying sometimes. So here they are. It's late afternoon. Ben didn't have his nap. As soon as I said we're leaving the park, he melted down and cried. But I'm not concerned because once he's strapped into his car seat, he'll be out. Sometimes I even drive around at night just to lull him to sleep. I'm holding him in one arm and pushing his little Tikes car with the other when an older woman suddenly jumps into our path. She circles me and stares into Ben's face. Honey, you okay? I decide to let this play out. You know this man, she asks. Where's your mommy? Ben stops crying and clings tighter to me. Actions, I'm guessing, don't indicate I'm a marauder. But she continues. Is this man hurting you, honey? Do you know him? Ben gives a WTF expression. I pat his back and he mutters, Daddy, tired. Now I pivot to see her clearly as Ben clings harder to me. Are we just about done? She shrugs. Predators stalk children in parks. Parents take children to parks. Now I regroup, breathing deeply. So you also accost women carrying crying children, right? The sneer reappears. Statistically, most predators are overwhelmingly male. I turn away as she babbles. So this, one brief little scene that is all about misconceptions. While we all want to protect children, it's a fair question to ask. Is a man holding a crying child viewed the same way as a woman holding a crying child in a public place? All these things and more, There's an extended scene. One of the longest scenes in the entire novel actually involves a stuffed animal because it's Ben's favorite stuffed animal. And we all know how important that is. Yeah. And when it gets lost, Michael will write a check for $1,000, even though the monetary value is he bought it for $1. He bought it out of the back of a van that somebody was selling. But it's, it means the world to his son, so therefore it means the world to him. And he's tearing his whole life apart looking for this stuffed animal. Again, I won't give anything away about what happens there, but, that's the type of father he is. Yeah. So when he gets accosted by a stranger, he responds. There's just so much misinformation about fatherhood. It's another reason I wanted to write this book. I've been hearing from so many people, even the women that read it say, wow, this reminds me of my brother. It reminds me of my boyfriend. It reminds me of my new husband. It reminds me of my nephew, my son, whoever, right. Women who know how many good men and good fathers there are out there and are frustrated by stereotypes.
I definitely am one of them. Definitely in that camp. Love our men, love our women, not about gender. Love my husband, love my son, love my grandson, love my grandfather on my mum's side. Yeah, love our men.
Absolutely.
What would the world be like without our men?
Yeah. We both have sons, and we want our sons to have, great relationships and be great fathers as well. So we definitely, want to protect that the sanctity of parenthood, regardless of what side you're on. But I like that you point out certain elements that really aren't discussed a lot. Just the fact that a man sitting there in a park holding a crying child and what that looks like. I mean, that's not something we really talk about, but it's very important that.
Yes. Can I just say something? A lot of the time, this is what I explain to people when they come into me. We need to be very careful with our own biases. We need to be careful with our own perspectives and the lenses that we put on. Sometimes we'll put on a set of lenses, and so this woman in the park, Bill, is looking at you through this particular lens of being somebody who is potentially doing something wrong with a child, instead of taking off the lenses and actually seeing it from a whole picture point of view. Let's start to take off the lenses and stop trying to put our bias into situations that aren't necessarily real, as in yours.
Right. No, absolutely. And I, as a single father myself, I remember when my son was very young, and we would be on the road, staying in hotels and airplanes and everything else. And I used to think, when he was very young, 2, 3, 4, I used to think, well, I'm grateful. I mean, of course, I would love any child, boy or girl, but I'm grateful he's a boy, because it's really tough to be a single dad and have a young daughter and take her into restrooms and things like that, because a lot of assumptions are made. And so it made it a little easier with a boy. but I still, I had encounters like that at times. I checked into a motel one time. We were on the road and we pulled into a motel, and I got I got a complete, uh, interrogation at who I was and what I was doing, and I understand people taking precautions, and no one wants the worst scenario to happen.
Sure.
But again, it's just there are all kinds of ways that we define family now, and it's not the four little figures on the car of a mommy and a daddy and a son and a daughter. In some cases it is, but it's not the only model. And obviously you can mix up those figures in any different combination you can think of,
Right.
2 daddies and 2 moms and two everything,
Half a couple of kids and a half a dog and half a couple cats.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, and parental alienation can even be shown towards pets. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean just about children. You can get a couple, if you've got an alienator who has that personality trait, will be fighting over the pet with you as well. So there's a bit of a warning if you're with a partner who's already doing that. Watch out if you have kids.
I have another question, and I don't know how much you want to talk about it, so I'm going to leave that up to you. So I think you said that the book is international, and where did it take Michael?
Well, at one point, Ben is abducted by his mother, and so he has no idea where Ben is. And I think if I indicate the country, it might spoil some of the setup to that. But I will say it's a country, I picked a specific country for a specific reason, because the rules on parenthood are different there, as they often are from country to country, But Michael eventually has to go to the Court of The Hague in Holland and go to Interpol to fight to get his son back.
Oh my goodness. And this is something that's truly happening out there, people. It's not unusual what you've written about there, Bill.
No. Again, if you, the thing with the book is, it's not just about the person at the center, it's about their world. So, when I had, this may sound a little self-serving, I've talked about it before, but I'll share it with you. In the back of a book, there are blurbs, as they're called in the industry, that other writers usually, or famous people. So in my first book, I've got 2 big celebrities. On Attention All Passengers, my airline book, the blurbs are from Ralph Nader and from Captain Sully Sullenberger, who landed the airplane on the Hudson River. So
I saw that movie.
Those are great, yeah. So here, there's 3 wonderful, wonderful writers, Catherine Taylor, Judy Stone, and Tom DeHaven, who have given blurbs to After Child. But again, at the risk of sounding self-serving, I invented a new term that I've joked about that I called the rejurb. It's a combination of a rejection, but it's so good it's a blurb. You could use it on the back of the book, even though it's from an editor who turned the book down. So I and many others sort of scratched our heads, because After Child was sent out to all the big publishing houses in New York, and it received rejections, and in some cases the rejections were 2 or 3 pages long if you printed them out. And that usually doesn't happen. Usually they're 1 sentence long. Good luck with this, And so one editor, who was female, said, it kept me up, and I cried, and it was beautiful. And I'm thinking, well, great. So when do we publish? Instead, she was turning it down, and her reasoning was that women do most of the book buying, as I mentioned earlier, and they won't want to read about this tale from a father's perspective. And I said, well, I could see that if he was a lousy father, if he was a violent or aggressive or awful father, uncaring father. I mean, it's one thing we could say about Michael with complete certainty. He is absolutely loving and devoted to his father, to his son. So I tried to make the case that, book buying and everything, movies, TV, everything, there's so much word of mouth. So even if we say, okay, maybe a given man may not walk into a bookstore and look for this book, the women in his life will tell him about it. They will say, his mother, his sisters, his new girlfriends, his female friends, his female coworkers, hey, did you see After Child? This sounds a lot like what you went through. You got to read this.
Read it to him.
It'll also make a wonderful resource book for therapists too who work with couples.
Well,
That's why I'm getting it. One, because of that's my experience, and two, because I can lend that out in my library to anybody who may benefit from it as well.
well, I have to tell you though, it's strictly against U.S. law to lend books published. No, I'm just kidding. I'd rather they buy it, but sorry. Okay, you can lend
Sure,
it.
sure. Yeah, well, with the hope that they will buy their own
There you
copy.
go.
But
There you go.
sometimes I can like
There's a
fish
happy
them
couple.
along.
Yeah.
But,
Yes.
but trust me, if anybody has financial issues and can't afford it, please do lend and lend and lend. I'm happy to get the word out.
And there is going to be an Audible version of it coming soon. So if people do not want to read and they like to listen better, or maybe when you're out jogging or exercising, getting your fresh air, you can listen in on it. So that's always a great option to have too.
Yeah, I live right. I'm sorry. I live right near a truck stop, and so I stop in there sometimes to pick things up, just right outside where I live. And the truckers, there's a huge section of Audible books for long haul truckers who are driving for days on end.
Well, I'm sure they will really relate to the story, a lot of them too, because I work with truckers, and a lot of their stories are about being away for a long period of time because they're trying to escape what's happening with their marriage breakdowns and not being able to see their children. So they take especially across Australia, they take the long haul runs so that they're not in such terrible pain and grief. So for them, they could listen to this and then potentially not feel as isolated as well.
That's a great thought. I'll have to visit the truck stop after the audio book comes out and talk to the manager. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good thought. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
So is it on Kindle, did you say?
Yes,
is that where you can get it?
Yes.
Okay, Kindle.
Yeah. So I'll be honest with you. I mean, I love that. Both of my books, in fact. Attention all passengers, the airline expose. This is in print and Kindle and audio. There's an audio version. I didn't do the audio version. I wanted to, but they don't allow writers to do it unless you're an actor and you have experience. And so it's a television actor did that one. But I myself, I'll be honest, I'm a paper person. I like to hold a book in my hand.
Me
I love
too.
to smell a book. I love to touch a book. I love to walk into a bookstore. That's just who I am. But I love that, for those that want a Kindle, great. It's another option.
I'm so good at scrolling through a book.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I agree. I keep every book I've ever bought, and a whole bunch more out in my practice. I love it.
I could pivot this over to the bookshelves behind me. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm terrible. I'm really naughty. I draw in my books and colour them and dog ear the pages, and they're very well loved. They've got my name all over them. My poor kids are never going to be able to unsell them if I knock off.
It's funny you say this, Lise, because I was thinking about putting a sign on one of my many bookshelves, because that's all I possess basically is books. And you can ask me for money, you can ask me for anything I own, but please don't ask to borrow my books, because I want to get them back, so it's not, sorry. Anything else?
Awesome.
Yeah, we put a boomerang on the front of ours, so that's like, make sure it comes back. Yeah, or just read that chapter and we talk about it the next week. Yeah, for sure. That's homework. So
I've lent out. I don't have like regular books. I have technical books because I'm an information security engineer by day, so mine are all gross books. Nobody likes to borrow them except for other engineers or people that are in that IT industry. And I'll tell you, I write my name across. In fact, one. I'm doing this one. So I always write my name across here because no matter what, no matter where that book goes, you can see that it belongs to me.
Well, we had a book launch party for Half the Child. Some wonderful people. There's an aviation school called Vaughan College of Aeronautics right across the street from LaGuardia Airport in Queens, New York, where the novel is set. And I happened to teach at Vaughan a couple of years ago and have a great relationship there. And they're wonderful people. And the president is terrific, Sharon DeVivo. And so they allowed me to have the book party at Vaughan College. And the lobby of the college looks like, it's often used in TV and movies, it looks like an airport terminal. And so it's often they use it like Mad Men and things like that, set in the 50s and 60s. And so, we were there, I'm signing all these books. And then I had friends and relatives come up and say, well, I bought the Kindle. And I'm like, well, I just haven't learned how to sign a Kindle yet, so yeah, I can help you if it's paper, but,
Yeah.
but
Sounds
whatever gets
brilliant.
people reading, I'm all for. Trust me, I'm not a snob about stuff like that. Whatever gets you reading, great. I just love to see people read.
Yeah. We do have a question, and I want to ask it before it, flies by. So Sherry is asking what the book is about. So this book is called Half the Child, and it's about, it's a nonfiction, or no, it's a fiction story about a 4-year period of time, and then the child was abducted and taken out of the country, and the fight to get the child back. So that's the gist of the book. And then Bill, she asks you, what kind of investigative writing do you do?
Well, so I wear a lot of different hats, as we've been mentioning. I write nonfiction, I write fiction, I teach at times. I'm a consumer advocate for the world's largest nonprofit consumer organization, Consumer Reports, which is a household name in the United States. You may know it down under, I'm not sure, but...
No, Dawn told me a little bit about it because I was a little bit, I wasn't sure what it was. So you're a consumer advocate.
Right.
Yeah, so you write for the general public with regards to things to do with the airline.
Well, it's more than just writing. I do work as a journalist at times for Consumer Reports, but I'm their aviation advisor. So I'm the person who advocates in Washington on airline issues for consumers. So I testify in Congress.
Okay, right.
The last time I flew was in early March. It was to go to Washington to testify in Congress on an airline hearing. And so we represent consumers. Now. And of course, with COVID, I've been busier than ever. I know some people are bored and doing jigsaw puzzles, but the airlines here in the United States have been absolutely awful about giving refunds to passengers who've booked flights and now have no need to take those flights, or the flight's been canceled. They're giving them vouchers for future travel, and they don't want to do that. So I'm always fighting for consumers, either on issues like that, monetary issues, safety issues. There's a theme of children running through a lot of the different things I do. I write a lot and advocate a lot about the need to restrain children in airplanes and commercial flights. If you travel with a child as a lap child, which in the United States is allowed for kids under 2, it can be very dangerous. Chances are nothing will happen, but you need to think, well, when I drove to the airport at 50 miles an hour, the kid was in a child seat, because every state in the United States requires that. Yet I just got on this tube that's going to go at 5 times that speed, and I'm holding on to them. And I assure you, no matter how much you love that little child, unless you're, as I often say, unless you're from the planet Krypton with a big S on, you cannot, the G-forces, no matter how strong you are. So the advocacy work is a mixed blessing. I love it, and I feel very passionate about it. But I'll be very blunt. It's very hard to score victories because of the amount of money that the airline industry, like so many other industries, throws around in Washington. So we're fighting uphill battles all the time. Yep. And we keep fighting.
Industries and administrations and organizations and court systems. And
yes. Yeah, so that's what's interesting, because now I feel like I have a new front in advocacy. Since the novels come out, and I've gotten to meet so many wonderful people like both of you and the people that I've met through Parental Alienation Support Group, I'm suddenly, reading and advocating about custody issues too. I didn't see that happening when I was writing a novel. I'm used to writing a book and talking about the topic. But how could you not be involved? How can you not advocate? We're talking about kids, and it may sound simplistic, but adults make decisions, and adults, often make bad decisions, and they hurt each other, and I'm not unsympathetic to that. But I just put kids in a different category, because they didn't enter the relationship. They didn't make these choices. They didn't make these decisions. And you have to put their needs first. And the two of you want to bash each other, do it in private, whatever. But, the kids are where the focus needs to be. And how can you look at it any other way, really? I don't see how you can.
Exactly.
Yes, and the other thing is, people who are doing all that fighting and everything, we really need to shine a light on family and domestic violence, because that's what it is. The psychological abuse against each other, the physical, just all of that stuff not only affects you two, but it also affects the children, and we call it family and domestic violence because it runs right out into the community. So all of your arguing is not only affecting your world, it's affecting your neighbours who are hearing it, it's affecting the teachers and the children in the school classrooms. When your child has been exposed to it, they go to school. The other children are then exposed to that because the child can present in all different behaviours and upsetness, and so it's a really big thing. So please have a look at family and domestic violence. It's just not about punching each other. It's all sorts of things and a lot to do with how you are with another person. So just be very mindful of that too. We just want less of that. And thank you, Bill, for being an advocate on so many platforms. That's just amazing. And this is why we've created this channel, Humanly Possible, because we want to shine a light on people who are advocating from within their worlds and changing the world to be a better place. And a lot of people think, oh, change the world. I can't change the world. You can change your world. You can change who comes into contact with you, and you can advocate and get your voice out there. And if we all do this on some level, the entire world will change. So for people who stand up and say, yeah, I'm changing the world, like, yay. Like, thank you so much, Bill.
Yeah. No, listen,
we
thank you.
Really appreciate you.
I'm inspired by both of you, and I've been, looking at your posts and looking at your work, and, you're doing the best possible work. You're fighting for kids. So I'm honored to be on. I really am.
Well,
thank you, Bill.
We're absolutely glad that you came. And I just want to ask one more question. If there's anything else that you would like to share with our viewers on any topics, is there something else about Half the Child, or maybe about the writing or the advocacy you do with consumer affairs or journalism?
Sure. Well, that's very kind. I would just say that there is a website, and it's my website. It's called halfthechild.com. Nothing tricky, no punctuation or anything, no periods or anything. halfthechild.com. And on there is contact information. And I wasn't kidding before when I say I'm happy to talk to every single reader, whether I know them or not. And, I hear plenty from family and friends, and people have been so supportive of me. And so, I'm very lucky with the family and friends and support I have. But I love talking to strangers because, I've found that a novel can break down barriers between strangers. And when someone has, sent me an email through halfthechild.com, and I respond and they say, well, I was crying and it reminded me of, my son or my daughter or this or that. We have long extended conversations, and I'm happy to accept criticism too, even though they're always wrong. No, I'm kidding.
Constructive criticism.
Yeah.
Let's keep it constructive.
Right. Of course. Yeah. And like I say, when it gets to the gender bashing, that's when I step off, when the novel first came out, I went and I started following dozens and dozens and dozens of pages and blogs and stuff. And then a couple of them I just started weeding out. I said, they're using words that aren't even in my vocabulary, vile words about gender. And, I'm not.
That's when it's really a turnoff. You're not even, you don't even have an audience anymore when you turn the conversation to that violent, way of speaking. You're not.
It's violent communication. That's what we call it. Right. Yes. We need to practice non-violent communication.
Yeah, nothing can be resolved with that. So as soon as you start attacking somebody for something they say, the way they think, the way they speak, the words they use, the pictures that they use, you've kind of diluted the actual purpose of maybe someone's post that would have really meant the world to someone else. Maybe someone else needed to see that post, and maybe it wasn't meant for you. And that's something I think we forget, that when we post something out there, it's not specifically for one person. It's not a personal thing. It's something that inspired you inside, and you had a purpose for it. And we can't just apply that as, it has to be just like this in order for it to apply to me, or I'm going to come and bash you for it. So we got to stop that kind of stuff. That's just, it's not.
Well said. Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions or anything from anybody?
I'm not seeing any questions. I've been seeing things flying up, hearts and likes and all that kind of stuff. So I think we, basically I think they like what they have heard. Let's see. Oh wait, is this one? Nope, that one I already asked. It was just a duplicate. So you said your contact information is on the website.
Yes,
You're also on
absolutely. They can reach me right through halfthechild.com. It's very simple. You know, just reach out.
And the book links to buy the book is there as well.
Absolutely. Both books, in fact. Both books.
Everything's there.
This is the shameless part of the program. Both books available right on halfthechild.com. There are links for people, you know, people have different preferences and how they want to purchase things online, etc. So there's links there.
And they're not just in paperback or hard copy. They're also going to be available in Audible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Both books are available in print and Kindle, electronic form, and the audio of Attention All Passengers is already available. The audio for Half the Child, we're waiting any day now.
Plenty of ways, whichever way you prefer to read or learn or, you know, discover the information in here. Right. And I also want to say in closing that I think Half the Child makes a perfect title for a movie.
Well, from your lips, yeah, I'm trying to have those conversations, either a movie or a short limited TV series, because a lot of focus now is on TV. You know, this is a golden age for television, really.
Yeah, and I really think it's important to put things on film and in writing where people can actually start getting more and more aware. Because the more we show that, and like I've said in other podcasts, that when you're watching something, you kind of check out of, you know, the regular world and you're kind of just enthralled, and you're turned on your creative side of your brain. You kind of shut down your left brain, you turned on your right brain, and you're just involved. And some people even, you know, get so involved in a movie or a documentary that they kind of relate to a specific character. And so they actually kind of live through that character as the movie's playing out. Now, I'm sure that not everybody's going to want to play certain roles in these types of stories that we are putting out there, but it might make you think. If you're the one parent, you can maybe start seeing how that is applying to, you know, the real world. Like maybe it's not in your family, but maybe as you're watching the film, you realize, oh my gosh, my sister's married to, you know, went through this, or my brother is going through that right now. And you start really becoming aware. And the more that people are aware, the more you should stand up and speak out about, hey, you know, I just saw a film and it kind of reminded me of a situation, and I think you should watch it. And let them watch it and find out and learn for themselves. And eventually maybe we'll start softening the hearts of the children that will want to come back and want to get to know that long lost parent.
Right.
Yes.
That's great. I mean, if I can have even a very tiny role in helping with that, I'd be honored. You know, it really would be great.
The thing. We all have a tiny role. Not one of us is going to solve this. It's going to take all of us. So we all have we all have our space that we're pushing that bar up with, you know,
we
have to push.
Right.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, in response to what you said, I am, you know, actively trying to get some interest in a TV or movie version. For an actor, Michael would be a fun part to play, I would think, because you really get to do everything. You get to do these dramatic scenes in an air traffic control tower. He's a boxer, so there are physical scenes where he's in the boxing ring. You get to do romantic scenes. You get courtroom drama scenes, but most of all, I think
for
an actor,
Nicolas Cage.
I have a feeling you were going to say that for anyone, for any role. You had that ready. But you know, the best scenes of all, I would think, are the scenes between Ben and Mike, and there are lots of them. You know, and for an actor, what's better than showing the soft side of being a father? You know, Michael is reinventing fatherhood based on his own father, who was, you know, sort of an anti-model in some ways, you know, as admirable as he is in other fields like at work. But he's saying, no, I'm going to forge my own way. Again, a demographic of one, you know, not that there aren't other role models around him, his older brother, et cetera, but, you know, the scenes between, for me, my favorite scenes in the novel, I'm allowed to have favorites too. My favorite scenes in the novel are between Michael and Ben. You know, that's the heart of the novel. Everything else is what's going around it, because Ben is the center of the novel, you know.
Right. Well said. Well, and if it does go for casting, just make sure Alyse and I are on that list, and we
Oh,
get.
no question. Are you
get
kidding
something.
me? You better
Clint
get the Screen
Eastwood.
Actor Guild cards, yeah.
I'm thinking Clint Eastwood's company, Malpaso, his son might be able to play, and Clint could be the grandfather.
Well, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to Clint if you're on speed dial with him, okay?
I'm not.
Feel
I
free.
wish I named
you
my
imagine
dog
it?
after him.
Off a movie, that would be awesome. This is where it
My
all
German Shepherd was Clint Eastwood.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. I'm so in admiration of your work, and I was so happy when you reached out and asked me to join you. I'm happy to come back anytime and talk about these things.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of this, and sharing the book without really telling us the final. So we'll get the book. Everybody out there needs to get the book, and let's start changing the world.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Bill.
you, everybody, for joining us. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.